It was my third day photographing the Alderson residence, a pristine example of Cliff May's California ranch style, but something about the quality of some of the woodwork kept drawing me back to the same corner. "You're fascinated with that built-in, aren't you?" Eleanor Alderson, the owner and original occupant of the house, shuffled into the room with 2 mugs of coffee. "I am. There's something about the joinery. It's different from the cabinetry in some of the other Cliff May homes I've documented for the book." My name is Maya Reyes, and I'd spent the last 18 months photographing and researching mid-century ranch homes for what my publisher hoped would be the definitive coffee table book on the subject. Eleanor nodded knowingly. "That's because Cliff May didn't design or build that bookcase. A man named Gabriel Santiago did. He had a distinctive way with wood, like he was coaxing it rather than forcing it." The name struck me like a physical blow. Gabriel Santiago. My grandfather. My coffee mug wobbled precariously as I set it down on the side table. Eleanor's eyes narrowed with concern. "Are you all right, dear? You've gone quite pale." I pulled out my phone and found the photo I'd been thinking of, the one from my childhood, me at 5 years old sitting in a reading nook that had the exact same curved edge detail, the same hidden finger pull. The woodwork I'd grown up with in my mother's modest house in Echo Park, before it was sold after my parents' divorce. "Gabriel Santiago was my grandfather, my mom's dad," I said, showing Eleanor the photo. "But this doesn't make sense. Abuelo was a cabinet maker who worked out of his garage. He never worked on homes like this." Eleanor's face transformed with surprise, then something like vindication. "Well, that explains why you've been drawn to that specific corner. Blood remembers." She lowered herself into a Danish modern armchair. "Your grandfather wasn't just a cabinet maker, dear. He was an architectural woodworking genius who got pushed out of the spotlight." For the next hour Eleanor told me a story I'd never heard, about my grandfather's brief but brilliant partnership with Richard Harmon, a homebuilder, in the early 1960s. How together they'd developed a distinctive approach to indoor-outdoor living spaces that had become synonymous with luxury California ranch homes. How Richard had gradually taken credit for Gabriel's innovations, eventually pushing him out entirely and building Harmon Developments into a West Coast empire. After the split, Eleanor said, Gabriel took what little money he had and bought that small Cliff May in Echo Park, that's probably the one you remember, and set up his workshop. He did pieces for those who knew his work. My husband commissioned him directly for our built-ins after seeing Richard's inferior attempts to replicate Gabriel's technique in another home. I remembered that workshop, the smell of sawdust and varnish, the way my grandfather would let me arrange the wood scraps into tiny cities. I'd spend hours there while my mother worked double shifts as a nurse. Abuelo died when I was 15, leaving behind only his tools and that small house, which my mother had been forced to sell to pay for his medical bills. Do other homeowners know? I asked. Some might, most probably believe they have authentic Harmon woodwork. Eleanor gave me a meaningful look. Harmon Developments is about to launch some big retrospective. I saw it in Architectural Digest. Cole Harmon is calling it their Heritage Collection or some such nonsense. Cole Harmon. Richard's son. The current CEO of Harmon Developments, known for his aggressive expansion of the brand into museum exhibitions and licensed furniture collections. I'd interviewed him once for a magazine piece, found him polished, calculating, and utterly convinced of his family's design superiority. Eleanor, I said carefully, would you mind if I expanded the scope of my photography here? I'd like to document all of your built-ins. Document away, she said with a small, satisfied smile. And when you're done, I have something to show you in the attic. The something turned out to be a dusty portfolio of my grandfather's original sketches, preserved by Eleanor's late husband who had championed Gabriel's work. Among them were drawings of innovations I recognized from dozens of prestigious homes I'd photographed, designs credited exclusively to Richard Harmon in every architectural history I'd ever read. I left the Alderson house that evening with my camera full of photographs and my mind racing with possibilities. What had started as research for a coffee table book had suddenly become something far more personal, and potentially explosive. Over the next 2 months, I methodically built my case while pretending to continue my straightforward book research. I visited 23 Cliff May homes with Harmon woodwork, discovering that same distinctive joinery in 17 of them. In 3, I found what Eleanor had told me to look for, my grandfather's signature, a tiny GS carved into the underside of a shelf or behind a panel, visible only if you knew exactly where to look. I quietly reached out to former craftsmen who had worked in the era, collecting testimonials from those willing to speak. Most were elderly now, with little to lose. Of course it was Gabriel's work, confirmed Walter Reyes, 86, and sharp as the chisels he still kept in perfect condition in his Pasadena garage. Richard had the business sense and the connections to men like Cliff May, but Gabriel understood wood in a way I've never seen before or since. But the real breakthrough came when I received an unexpected email from Lydia Harmon, Cole's daughter and the company's reluctant marketing director. We'd met briefly at a design conference the previous year. I saw your name on the press list for Dad's retrospective opening. If you're working on something about our company, there are things you should know. Coffee? We met at a small cafe in Silver Lake, far from the Harmon offices in Century City. Lydia was 30, approximately my age, with her father's sharp features softened by uncertainty. I found some old correspondence, she said after we'd settled with our drinks. Between my grandfather and yours. I was researching material for the Heritage marketing campaign, and it was in a box nobody had opened in decades. The letters, which she showed me on her tablet, were damning. Richard Harmon had explicitly acknowledged Gabriel's designs as the cornerstone of their early success in private correspondence, even as he publicly claimed sole credit. Why show me this? I asked. Lydia stared into her cup. Because our company's entire brand history is built on a lie, and because my father is about to launch a museum retrospective celebrating my grandfather's visionary approach to California living. The retrospective was scheduled for the Pacific Design Center in 3 weeks. Invitations had gone out to design world luminaries, architecture critics, and collectors. The exhibition would launch the new Heritage collection of Harmon-branded homes and furniture, all based on my grandfather's uncredited innovations. What do you want me to do with this information? I asked, although a plan was already forming in my mind. I don't know, Lydia admitted. I just couldn't stay silent anymore. My father would disown me if he knew I was talking to you. What if, I said carefully, there was a way to correct history without destroying your family's company? What if there was a way for both legacies to be acknowledged? The night of the retrospective opening arrived, the Pacific Design Center transformed into a celebration of mid-century California modernism. My press credentials got me through the door, my camera around my neck serving as both disguise and weapon. Cole Harmon worked the room with practiced charm, accepting congratulations and directing attention to the elaborate displays. The exhibition was undeniably beautiful, models of iconic homes, restored furniture pieces, and enlarged photographs of California indoor-outdoor living spaces through the decades. At the center was a recreation of a woodworking studio meant to represent Richard Harmon's creative workspace. I photographed everything methodically, exchanging professional nods with other journalists and critics. I'd submitted my coffee table book manuscript a week earlier, but my editor didn't yet know that I'd also prepared a very different piece, a meticulously researched exposé complete with comparative photographs, expert testimony, and the documentary evidence Lydia had provided. I had 2 versions ready to send to every major design publication and newspaper architecture section. One would destroy Harmon Developments completely, revealing decades of appropriation and deceit. The other would announce a historic clarification of the Harmon-Santiago partnership, positioning the revelation as a celebration of an overlooked genius rather than an indictment of theft. Which version went live would depend on the next hour. I spotted Lydia across the room, her face tense despite her polished appearance. She gave me an almost imperceptible nod. Our agreed signal that Cole had refused her last-minute appeal to acknowledge my grandfather's contributions voluntarily. It was time. I approached Cole as he stood beside a particularly beautiful built-in display, explaining the distinctive Harmon joinery technique to an admiring group of potential heritage home buyers. Remarkable craftsmanship, I said, inserting myself into the conversation. The Santiago method is truly unmistakable. Cole's practiced smile flickered for just an instant. I'm sorry, the what? The Santiago method, I repeated, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Gabriel Santiago, your grandfather's partner. I'd been researching their collaboration for my book. The group looked between us with interest. Cole's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. There was no significant partnership, he said smoothly. You must be thinking of someone else. My grandfather developed these techniques independently. I smiled and took out my phone, pulling up the photograph Eleanor had given me, my grandfather and Richard Harmon standing together beside the framework of what would become the famous Laurel Canyon model home, their signatures together on the architectural plans visible in the image. How fascinating, I said, showing the photo to the gathered guests, because I have extensive documentation suggesting otherwise. Including letters from your grandfather explicitly crediting Gabriel Santiago with these design innovations. The potential clients murmured with interest. More people were drifting toward our conversation. This isn't the appropriate venue for this discussion, Cole said, his voice lower but harder. Perhaps my office would be better. Oh, but this is exactly the right venue, I countered. A retrospective should be thorough, don't you think? I have Gabriel Santiago's original drawings upstairs in the second exhibition hall. Eleanor Alderson was kind enough to loan them for tonight. Would you like to see them compared with these displays? By now, several architecture critics had drifted over, sensing a story. I saw Cole calculating rapidly behind his eyes, measuring scandal against compromise. Ms. Reyes, isn't it? He said, his voice betraying nothing. Why don't we step into the director's office for a moment? I think we might have an opportunity to enhance tonight's exhibition with some exciting new information. The negotiation took 28 minutes. When we emerged, Cole immediately approached the exhibition director, whispered something in his ear, and then clinked a glass for attention. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced to the crowded hall, I'm thrilled to share an unexpected development in our understanding of the Harmon legacy. The room quieted. Through the diligent research of architectural journalist Maya Reyes, we've discovered additional information about my grandfather's early career that adds a new dimension to our retrospective. Richard Harmon's revolutionary approach to California living was developed in partnership with master woodworker Gabriel Santiago, whose contributions have been overlooked in our architectural history. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw Lydia's shoulders relax slightly from across the room. In celebration of this discovery, Cole continued, Harmon Developments is proud to announce the establishment of the Santiago Harmon Foundation, which will provide scholarships for talented woodworkers from underrepresented communities. Ms. Reyes will help us curate a special edition to this exhibition, showcasing recently discovered original drawings and highlighting the brilliant collaboration that shaped California modernism. He raised his glass. To recognizing all the hands that built our architectural heritage. The crowd applauded, already buzzing with the unexpected twist. Architecture critics were scribbling notes or typing on phones. The story would be everywhere by morning. Cole turned to me when the attention had shifted, his smile tight but resigned. Satisfied? It's a start, I replied. The foundation details are in the document I gave you. I'll be watching to make sure it's implemented as agreed. You play hardball for a design journalist. I'm also a granddaughter, I said simply. And you've built your empire on my grandfather's erased legacy. Consider this an extremely gentle correction. 3 months later, I stood in the newly renovated workshop behind my grandfather's original Cliff May home in Echo Park, the home I had just repurchased with the advance from my revised book, now titled Unbuilt. The Santiago Harmon Vision for California Living. The Santiago Harmon Foundation had its headquarters in the main house, with the workshop serving as a training space for scholarship recipients. The first class would start next month. Eleanor Alderson sat in a sunbeam coming through the clerestory windows, her hand running appreciatively over a workbench my grandfather had built. He would have hated all the fuss, she said with a small smile. But he would have loved seeing these tools in use again. Was it worth it? Lydia asked, entering with coffee for all of us. She'd left Harmon Developments to help me run the foundation, a decision that had caused a family rift that was only now beginning to heal. The company's stock took a hit when the story broke. They've recovered, I noted. The Heritage Collection has been rebranded as the Partnership Collection and is selling better than projected. Turns out people love a good redemption story almost as much as they love exclusive real estate. I ran my hand along the grain of the workbench, feeling the subtle curve my grandfather had worked into what could have been a purely functional edge. That had been his gift, finding the organic flow within rigid structures, opening spaces that seemed closed. Besides, I added, it was never about damaging the Harmon legacy. It was about restoring my grandfather's name alongside it. Through the open sliding doors, perfectly balanced on tracks my grandfather had likely designed, I could see the garden and the hills beyond. The indoor-outdoor flow that defined California ranch living. My grandfather, along with men like Cliff May and Richard Harmon, had helped create spaces where boundaries dissolved between inside and outside. It seemed fitting that his legacy had finally done the same, blurring the lines between credit and obscurity, between what was lost and what could still be reclaimed. To open floor plans, Eleanor said, raising her coffee mug. Lydia and I raised ours in return. To open floor plans. Please like and subscribe for more great revenge story videos. We appreciate your support. We'd love to hear your family member done wrong stories. Please feel free to share in the comments.